So this is the Nickel Talk About Anything podcast. Here in the studio with me, I've got Chief Derek Brewer from Zephyrhills Police Force. Chief, welcome. Thanks for showing up and being here and being part of this.
Absolutely. I appreciate the invite because I think this is a great opportunity to get people to know members of this community.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've noticed, I've lived here about 7.5 years in Zephyrhills, and of course, I grew up in a lot smaller town than this, but then I lived in Nashville, Tennessee for 11 years, and so coming here, it's a lot more of a small town, and yet there's still there's crime and things like that you experience in larger areas. I mean, where I grew up, like, we didn't have, the police was just the sheriff's department responding to accidents and minor things, and then like here, just yesterday I was visiting somebody's home that's a member of this church, and we also mow their lawn when they're gone, and they're actually in the county district, but somebody had broken into their house, and it looked like they just pilfered through it, drawers and medicine cabinets, and nothing was really damaged, but they unlocked all the windows and all the doors, so it looked like they could get back. So I notified them and said, do you want me to involve the police? I said, I don't think they're going to be able to do much of anything, without anything being really damaged. And they said, why bother? It's like,
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate part is, I think from a law enforcement standpoint, we don't want residents to feel that way.
Yeah.
We want them to report those incidents because you just never know what you get from the ones that maybe don't want to prosecute, or they don't think anything will happen. You just never know what you may get from that particular crime scene that may solve another.
That's true. Yeah.
And we also, if they're not reported, it's hard for us to know what the issues are. We talk about hotspots and stuff like that. So a lot of times hotspots help us identify where the crime is occurring. So if we don't know about it, it's not, the map's not going to light up.
So basically, when you have those hotspots, you can actually concentrate certain efforts, to address that. Maybe send more patrol through the area, or just be paying more attention in what you're listening to know, okay, these are trends that are happening.
Absolutely.
Is that it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think a lot of times you'll see that crimes occur in certain areas because, particularly burglaries, your suspect doesn't live that far away.
Okay.
So, if we can put more resources over there, it may help us identify who or what the problem is, and take the necessary steps to try to prevent that from happening. But if we don't know it, then it's hard to address those.
Makes sense, yeah. So, like, what would be a typical response? So let's say we did call it in, if it was in the city limits, you'd have an officer respond. Do you have crime scene investigators or detectives that show up, or does just the officer have fingerprint kits and stuff like that they do? Or how does that work?
Typically we do, the officer ends up taking the initial report.
Okay.
If we feel like there's anything of evidentiary value, we will send crime scene. In fact, we usually send crime scene to most.
Yeah.
And from that point, we usually give those cases to detectives because a lot of times, they may be related.
Yeah.
So the detectives kind of compile all of those cases to see if the MO is matching up to others.
Kind of see some trends, like, hey, this one's related to this one.
Correct.
So maybe we can put a couple of those details together.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, now this one, like, for instance, was in Pasco County's territory. Do they have a similar process? Are they going to respond in a lot the same way? I'm not asking you if they don't, to say anything negative about them. But
I would think so.
Okay.
I don't know the process, but I would say it's a pretty typical response.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good to know that, as a citizen, there's a lot of stuff in any realm of life that it's like, man, I didn't know that. I was reading something on Facebook today about somebody's car insurance, that they were in a friend's vehicle and they thought they were covered by their insurance.
Right.
But the problem was they didn't have their vehicle anymore, and they hadn't reported that to their insurance, so they actually weren't covered. It is a weird, like, loophole in the thing. And so, like, now they were speeding in their friend's car, the friend's car got impounded, and it's like all these things that you're like, I wish I would have known that probably before I loaned them my car and all that stuff. So, yeah, with policing, I think a lot of times, even for me talking with these people on the phone, it was like, do you guys really want to pursue this if nothing was damaged, that
Right.
kind of thing. But now hearing it from you, I'm learning stuff like, oh, we're actually not helping the police force out to help solve other crimes that
Right.
might have been potentially worse. So that's good.
And I'll just give you an example in that situation. Let's just say that a Pasco County deputy did arrive and took a report. A lot of times they're going to check with neighbors
Okay,
to see
yeah.
if they saw anything. Well, they may be victims as well.
Oh, okay.
So, and again, you just never know what you may collect at a crime scene that may help solve the others.
Okay.
So, I always encourage people to report stuff, even if it seems insignificant.
Yeah.
Um,
Call the non-emergency number.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And just,
Right.
It's not a 911 call at that point.
Right.
Nobody was there. Nobody was,
correct.
nobody was lurking around at that point.
Right.
But call a non-emergency and get it out there. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here, we live in Zephyrhills, or this where we serve. You probably don't want to give your address for the record.
Right.
Like you,
So,
you don't have the. You want to have a luxury that I don't. I live next door to the church where I'm a pastor at, and so it seems like everybody and their brother knows that. But you have a lot more reason to probably keep that hidden.
Sure.
Every now and then there's somebody that's got a grudge, or you just don't need people knocking on your door asking these questions that I'm asking about their friend's house that got broken into. But you serve in this community. How long have you actually been on force here?
Yeah, just over 20 years.
Yeah. So, had you served on another force somewhere before this, or was this
Zephyrhills PD is my first and only law enforcement job.
Wow.
And I don't regret a second of it.
That's great. So you've seen a few changes over time.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Your predecessor had he been the chief the whole time that you were on the force, or how long had he been there?
So actually, there's been, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4 chiefs prior to me.
Okay.
That I've worked for.
That you've worked for, yeah.
So, I've seen different styles. Some have lasted, longer than others.
Yeah.
Like Chief Shears, he had lasted quite a long time. He was able to retire here, which is a phenomenal achievement as a police chief. And but we had others that didn't make it.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, it just it didn't work out. But I feel pretty fortunate to have seen all those different styles.
Yeah. So you probably learned something from each of these guys,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, and some of it good, some of it bad, I'm sure.
Absolutely,
you know?
sure.
And probably what would you say, like, over time in how many years did you say?
20
20
yeah.
years. So in 20 years of being part of a police force, like, there's probably been a lot of changes in how policing happens. I mean,
Sure.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
and we're seeing calls for that around the nation, and a lot of
Absolutely.
riots and rallies and protests, and some peaceful, some not.
Yeah.
But how does somebody even approach that in your position? Because, I think of it from the terms of, I mean, I'm a pastor. I came into a church that had problems. There were some good folks here, and by all means, they were well-intentioned and doing good things, and yet there was also issues from maybe it was prior leadership or just sad realities of finances and crumbling building structures and all this stuff that, that I inherited that. And so some of it is, you don't want to say, oh, well, it was this person or that person's fault for any of this. It's just a simple reality of here's the thing that I was handed, and now I've got to make something good out of this that can actually be important to the community and make a difference. And so it's a lot of work sometimes to both manage currently what you have, but also work to change a culture and grow it. So did you find, do you relate to that a little bit with how since you've been in office as the chief of police here?
Obviously, I think, we've seen, since I started, we've seen the evolution of technology and social media that has greatly impacted law enforcement. And, adapting to that has not been easy because there's always a cost.
Yeah.
And also, kind of when it came to social media, there's a lot of unknown. Like, you try to adapt to the way society is communicating, but I can tell you from our standpoint, we know that social media is a great way to get out to the community,
Yeah.
but we still like those personal connections.
Sure.
So we've tried to mix the two, still get out there and talk to people, but at the same time, we understand people would rather get their information from their phone or their laptop or whatever
Yeah.
it is. So, adapting to that has been a challenge, and also going along with the technology we need for investigating crimes.
Yeah.
Has changed dramatically. It just seems like we're constantly looking at new technology, such as body cameras, and we've had those for several years now. And I think if you were to ask chiefs 10, 15 years ago, that would be the furthest thing from their mind, but now they're almost a necessity. And it's not just to protect the citizens, but it's there to protect the officers.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and that's something, that nobody ever wants to think is going to happen, but there might be an officer involved shooting or
yes.
just something terribly tragic that happens that, we've seen these, I mean, that's the curse of the internet and the immediate news cycle is everybody's judge and jury before we've actually seen facts. And so we see some kind of footage and we're like, oh my goodness, or we hear about some kind of shooting or something around the country and we're so quick to say it was this person's fault or that officer did this or that. And so
Sure.
that body cam footage can be there for that officer's protection if there was a justified situation.
Right.
But also in the other case for those, 0.01% of, officers that either woke up on the wrong side of the bed and had a horrible day that ruined somebody's life and their own and their family's lives, or maybe they've had a history that was leading towards that.
Right.
That body cam footage then helps the victim to get their justice too.
Sure.
So it can go both ways, I'm sure. But I bet there was probably a time when like officers were totally opposed to him because they're like, you don't put that on me, don't record everything I'm doing.
Oh, I think there's still kind of that sentiment among some. And truthfully, my personal opinion is you probably shouldn't be a cop if you.
Yeah, like if you're doing what's right, you'll be fine.
Correct. But I will tell you, it's an adjustment, and I'm very proud of the way the officers at the Zephyrhills Police Department have adjusted to that.
Yeah.
They have really embraced the program because I think they have seen it work in their favor more than it didn't.
Yeah.
So I think again, that's just one of those things where the unknown, you don't know how it's going to affect you or your job until you're doing it. And then once you realize when you're doing it and you understand the benefits of it, then you're a little bit more comfortable with it.
So have you had over time, officers that were maybe like not even just slow to get with the program on that, but really resistant to it that just said, no, I like the old school style policing, whatever that might be. But I mean, they look back to some way that it was and they think that it always needs to be this way. That just kind of didn't come along with the changes and ended up finding their way out of the department. I mean, did you have a lot of that kind of over time?
I think, I'll be honest with you, when we initiated the program, I think those officers weeded themselves out pretty quickly.
Yeah, like they started keying up their resumes pretty quickly, updating them to like start looking elsewhere.
Which I'm okay with because, again, if you're not comfortable with the change of law enforcement, probably shouldn't be in it.
That's true. I mean, on a totally different level, I've experienced some of that in church leadership with, just kind of coming in and my intention is never to push anyone out, but there's times where I've found, hey, what we're doing is broken or not working or not effective or just not what the church should be doing. And we're going to change our activities, we're going to change our calendar, and we're going to change our budget to reflect where we need to be focused. And it's almost like immediately who's going to be okay with that and who's not.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, probably in both settings, but I know in my world, people tend to cling on to that so long and they'll resist it so hard and they'll work against their friends and their pastor and everyone.
Sure.
And it's like, listen, there's 1,000 churches. Just pick one that does what you're wanting to do. But
Right.
I've got, I believe I was called here by God to work in this church and in this community, and so I'm going to do the things that I feel like He's leading me to do, and so I'm going to try to do that in a way that brings people on board.
Right.
But they're not all going to come on board, and so by the time, I said it this way, most of the time, by the time somebody's ready to walk out the door, I've never pushed them out, but I will hold it for them.
Yeah.
In a gracious way, but still, nonetheless, like by the time they're ready to go, I've been ready because they've made it clear what their intentions were.
Well, and that's actually a great point. And I will tell you that, even though I felt like the chiefs prior to me left me in pretty good
Yeah.
position, I did want to try to change some of the culture within the agency. And like you said, you kind of identify who's going to be okay with the change and who's not right away. And it really did help me change some of the culture within the agency. And truly I'm blessed to have the staff that I have because, they've embraced what we're doing and, not just within the department, but in the community. And, every one of them have given examples of, what I'm trying to establish, not just for our agency, but just police work in general. I know every agency doesn't subscribe to the way we do policing, but I believe the way we do it is the right way.
Yeah.
If it's not, it's the way I want it done. So,
So you talked about kind of the way you do it in your agency. How would you characterize that as far as like, I've seen it in action, and I've been there to the city council meetings where some of your new officers were installed and things like that, and just seeing what some of them have gone to school for, or some of their, you've brought in officers that have, they're multilingual so they can communicate with, residents who might not have English as any language they speak or not as their primary language, and, trying to, like, I see the efforts that you're trying to do, but how would you want to characterize it for us to know about?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, integrity is one of the first things we're looking for.
Yeah.
But I'd say when you're trying to diversify the department, and we say this all the time, you need diversity to attract diversity, right? Yeah. So there has been times where we have lacked that. So that was one of my goals, was to become more diverse.
Well, and Zephyrhills isn't a monocultural town by any stretch of the imagination. And so, I imagine, I like to insert myself into situations where I am in the minority because it helps me to identify with others. So like I go to the International Barbershop around the corner because A, I like the guys and I have a good time with them, but B, it's like, there's white guys that come in there too, but at least it's somewhere where I'm not the majority population. I get to kind of see somebody else's world and walk in their shoes for a minute and just kind of hear what they talk about, how they live, what they're experiencing. And we've had some pretty real conversations about things in the world in there. And so it's like, they've made movies about barbershops and how people sit there and shoot the breeze and everything. And it's a fun thing to do, but it's good to put yourself in diverse situations. And so when you can incorporate that into your agency, not only does it help the other officers, but it also helps, I think, the community see that your intentions are for everyone.
Absolutely. And again, it's not, obviously you want to represent the community.
Yeah.
So you want to have that diverse makeup so that it reflects your population. That's not always easy.
Sure.
Because a lot of those, some communities are very distrustful of the police. So why would they want to be part of it, right? So that does become difficult, but it's important to the community, but it's important to us too, because like you said, it gives you a different perspective.
Yeah.
It helps you learn more about how they see the world as opposed to a white police officer. I've learned so much from our Black and Hispanic
Mm-hmm.
officers just by talking to them.
Yeah.
And it's so important to what you're trying to build, that cohesion, but mutual respect. And that's the type of thing we're trying to get out is, hey, you know what? Good people make bad choices.
Yeah.
You know what? And understanding what they may have gone through in the past, whether it's with the police or anything else,
Yeah.
it kind of gives you a better appreciation of how they view the world.
Well, and you guys catch people sometimes on one of their worst days,
Absolutely,
right?
bad days.
And that might
Yeah.
be something that they caused.
Yep.
It might just be a situation they found themselves in. But
Right.
you got to be ready to deal with some pretty heavy stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I just came from. We had a funeral service here in the church just before our appointment here today, and it was a good celebration. But sometimes I've done funerals for people that died in tragic circumstances, maybe a couple different pedestrians that got hit and killed,
Yeah.
and those are just always they hit very hard,
Right.
and are very heavy. Especially one was a 17-year-old boy, and it's like, how do I bring comfort to the family in that time? I feel so incapable of it, really, to be honest, from a human perspective, and yet I imagine you guys see some stuff where you have to bring news to people sometimes that is
It's
that's a
emotional.
tough thing.
Yeah, it's emotional.
And so you got to be trained for all of those things, right?
Right.
I mean, not just for the policing, but also for when you have to tell somebody some bad news or
Yeah.
comfort them through that.
And obviously some people are better at it than others. But we preach having empathy, but not everybody has the same level of empathy. We have some that are they're going to deliver that information very matter of fact.
Yeah.
And
Well, and for that matter, empathy, I always think you have to have had some of that experience
Sure.
yourself too. And so this is when it actually really drove home for me what empathy really was. I've had people, I have a lot of older folks in the congregation, they complain about the sciatic pain and things like that. And I've had lower back pain most of my life, and I think, oh, I'll walk it off.
Right.
I push through it. And then I had my sciatic nerve get pinched. And it was like 3 weeks that I didn't feel like doing anything because it just, it hurt just to move or get out of bed. I couldn't feel my leg. I couldn't walk very well. I was like, okay, I get it now.
right.
And, I'm sitting there, talking to a chiropractor like, hey, when can you see me? You're like, oh, it's a week and a half, and then we'll do the initial. And I'm like, can we do something right now?
Right.
And so, oh, that's what these folks are going through. And so I had a lot more empathy now.
Sure.
And so I am more sympathetic when I do it because I've walked in those shoes. So
Right.
I think some of us, we learn empathy for different situations once it actually hits us.
Right.
And somebody might not have had a loved one close to them that died, or maybe the only people they know that died were 90 something years old, and they're like, oh, well, they were old, but
Right.
then as soon as your 60-year-old father or uncle or whoever passes away, now all of a sudden you get what other people are going through. And so you can try to train empathy, but until they get some of those situations personally,
No question.
sympathy is the best we can hope for. Being
Yes.
sympathetic.
But at the same time, I think, it doesn't take long in
Yeah.
police work to experience some of those situations.
Yeah.
So it really does allow you to quickly realize, wow, this person really is in some pain. I need to make sure that, I'm showing some level of, at the very least, courtesy and some
Yeah.
respect,
Yeah.
right? But one of the things, as you learn this job, you kind of, you may go to a call and it may seem insignificant, but obviously they called you for a reason,
Yeah.
right? So it's significant to them.
Significant to them.
So understanding that going in, you'll go a long way as a police officer because, it may seem like it's just not that big of a deal to you, but
Yeah.
hey, it's a big deal to them. So let's treat it as such.
Yeah, like the old fire department getting a cat out of a tree, and you're like, seriously, you're going to waste their time with this?
Right.
But to maybe that little old lady or whoever it is, like that cat is the only thing they
Correct.
got to live for
Right.
on a daily basis, and to them it's the world.
Right.
Um,
And we talk
Yeah.
a lot about, people's interaction with police, right? So it doesn't always have to be in a traffic stop. It could be on one of those scenes where there's a death of a loved
Yeah.
one, and how that interaction goes plays a big part in how they perceive police.
Sure.
So, we talk about, we live by three buzzwords: service, respect, and dignity. And
I've actually got that here on our screen,
Yeah.
I think.
um,
Somewhere. Here we go.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we try to apply that to just about every situation we go into, and I've just made it very clear, that is our mission. But at the same time, if you remember those three words going into those situations, are you applying the mission to these calls for service or any
Yeah.
interaction with the public?
It's good.
So, and I can tell you, I think that, again, police officers all have bad days.
Sure.
But I think they've done a wonderful job of taking that initiative and really applying it to what we're trying to do.
So, what are some of the like when you look at pools of candidates? If you have an officer's position that needs to be filled, are you looking primarily at officers who don't have much experience, or maybe just out of academy or school, or are you looking at, it seems like it's kind of tough to train somebody in this. Like if you're bringing in a new hire, it's almost rather find somebody that doesn't have any experience on a force yet, so that you don't have to untrain bad behaviors. Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's sometimes where you've got to have a certain level of experience, that you're looking for.
Right.
But
Well, and again, I kind of go back to integrity from the beginning
yeah.
of the interview, right? So
we can train the other stuff, but if you don't have integrity, forget it, right?
I've said this before. Like I'm driving the bus, right?
Yeah.
I'm the chief, so I'm driving the Zephyrhills Police Department bus. The ticket to get on the bus is integrity.
Yeah.
So whatever your experience, characteristics, what you bring to the table, if you don't have that, then maybe you shouldn't be on the bus.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to remember. Is that did you get that from a book? I'm trying to think of, there's a book that I read where he uses that analogy, and I'm trying to remember what it is. He talks about businesses that have failed and that have excelled, and it's a really well-known book.
I don't know the name of the book either, but I actually learned it in my master's program.
Okay.
And it was applying business principles
Yeah.
to law enforcement. So
Jim Collins, Good to Great. Does that sound right?
Yes.
I think that's what it is.
That's it.
Yeah, Good
Yep.
to Great. I was like
Right.
sitting here, I'm like, I can picture the cover.
You got it.
I've got to figure it
Yeah.
out. But yeah, and I listen to a lot of audiobooks on Audible.
Yeah.
And I know there's like a free one that you can get that's connected to the public libraries, and so people have been bugging me to do that. But I listen to a minimum of 2 books a month on Audible, and I was actually shocked recently. I was at a conference for pastors. I know I'm a nerd, right? We all have a thing.
Right.
And so I'm at this pastors conference in Orlando back in March, and I was blown away by this simple fact that they said, if you go to college, post-college, and I forget the number, but it was a very small percentage of men ever read a book at all, unless it has to do with their their company or their job forcing them to do it as part of
Right.
the training thing. And I was like, are you serious? I read minimum of 2 a month because that's what my Audible subscription level is, and then they throw in these free ones here and there. Every now and then I actually have time, I pick up a paper copy, so I'm like, I'm reading 30 books a year.
Right.
And that's not bragging. And sometimes I go back and reread old ones, and so sometimes some of it it might just be one bitter piece, but the what you were saying from good to great, just putting the right people on the bus, it's gonna serve it well.
Yep.
And putting the wrong folks on there, especially the wrong person in the driver's seat, isn't going to be effective. So I imagine that's quite a struggle. I mean, I see that in any organization on different levels of getting the right people in the right leadership
Yeah.
positions, and you can't advance your progress with the wrong people
Correct.
calling stuff out. So what have been some of the maybe struggles in getting I don't know how I want to say it, getting people to like, maybe you hire somebody, you say, okay, you've got integrity, but they won't adapt. Like, maybe they learned something in their college that they went to or at academy, and you're trying to get them to see how we're putting it in action. Do you have those problems at all in
Yeah.
sometimes?
Yeah, I think absolutely. You're always going to have that.
Yeah.
Everybody has different beliefs on, how, particularly law enforcement, and that's not just police officers. We're talking about the public too. They have a perception of
Right.
how law enforcement is
Right.
supposed to be
Right.
done. So, and I can appreciate that. So, will you ever find the perfect mix? I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
But I think as long as they understand what your mission is, and they still decide
It's like you
join.
signed up for this. This is what
Right.
we told you when you signed up. So
Right.
let's abide. Let's
Correct.
live by it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. It's not something that I'm very clear of what we're trying to accomplish from the very beginning of the hiring process. And I think that if you don't like the way that's done, you probably choose another path. But at the
Yeah.
very least, if you are offered a job and you come on, the expectation is clear. So there's an expectation to follow it.
So what are some of the areas, in our community where you guys have struggled the most working to make a change? For instance, I know one thing that you and I have been able to work together with a great group of folks on in our town. We call it the Hub, and it's somewhat unofficial at this point. We might have an organization called the Hub at some point, but you came to a group of people with a problem, or specifically to Beth Aker with
Right.
Meals on Wheels, and she rallied some troops around, and
did.
just like
Actually, she was amazing.
Beth is I went on a ride with her to somewhere where she was gonna go talk to someone and about a certain matter, and I was like, can I tag along with you? Like, I want to see this. And the person wasn't there, so we're sitting in the parking lot, and she called him, and she's like, okay, but here's what I need done, and when is it going to happen, and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. This is dragged out long enough. And I'm like, I need a little more of that, because like in my world, I'm told like, okay, you can't really push too hard because you'll isolate and alienate people. And she's like, I don't have time for that. We got stuff we got to get done. But she pulled together this group because you came with a problem. You want to, but that's one of them. You want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe unofficial,
Yeah.
but I will tell you, to me, it's the greatest group of individuals.
Yeah.
And I can't thank the ones that participate enough, because they really do have a common goal, and it's very unselfish, and they're looking out for one another, and that's what I love about this group.
Yeah.
Was that my intent when I went to Beth? I don't know. I just kind of felt like, community problems need to be addressed from community leaders. Yeah. And there's a lot of opportunity to complain about homelessness, and I understand that. But at the same time, I think it's fair to address homelessness in a compassionate and very ethical way.
Well, I mean, again, that goes back, what's on your badge on your arm,
Correct.
Is what your motto is, right? That's part of it is dignity.
Absolutely.
I mean, and respect. Like, you just, if you can't approach everyone with that, and some people,
Right.
we might say they're not worthy of that respect or dignity because of this, and this that they've done, and that might be true on some level.
Right.
But at the same time, like, we've all got blood coursing through our veins, right? Like, our DNA is almost, our DNA is within, I think, is 0.5%. It's all the same. It's only that little 0.5% that makes you you. So I don't care what your ethnicity, race, economic status, any of that is. Like, we're almost identical, and yet we treat each other so differently based on whatever these criteria. And so, like, you see, I mean, where I live, we're just down the street from Healing Hearts Cafe, which is one of the partners in the Hub.
Yep.
And they've been open over there for like a year and a half, and they're you're well aware, but I mean, they're a drop-in, daily drop-in kind of hangout place. They serve meals, they wash laundry, they My friend Ernest that works at the place where I get my haircut, Cuts and Fades, he's the one that owns it. He does haircuts for several of their folks, for free. Like he just said, hey, where can I help out? And I was like, you can go right there. You can walk to it from your barber shop, or they can walk to you and get their haircut. They've got mail services so people can have an address. But that also, once they moved there, that increased a lot of foot and bicycle traffic of homeless or almost homeless individuals. And so I tell you, Chief, I've picked up a lot of trash. I've dealt with some stuff. There's these metal lids that go over the communications boxes for Frontier or somebody. Somebody stole one the other night. I was sitting out here, I had a little campfire, and I heard this clanging noise. I'm like, what in the world? And I go out there, and the guts of the thing are hanging over. And why did this guy take it? And I've got security cameras, but they're so cheap. They're the ones from Harbor Freight, and they're just like, and I mean, my porch light is like a bright LED, so it washes it out. And so all I could see was a guy on a bike, and there's no way you could make anything out. And like all the FBI shows I watch or whatever shows that enhance stuff, I'm like, no, they don't. Not this. It's not like that. It's still grainy. It's a bad image. You're not getting anything from this. So I didn't feel the need to call that in, but it's like, he stole that thing off of there, Now, I'm not saying he was coming from Healing Hearts Cafe. I don't know where he was coming from, but I'm just saying, like, so I mean, if I found that guy, I'm not going to, try to tell him he's the scum of the earth, He's, who knows what his thing is that drives him to do petty stuff like that.
Right.
I don't know what he's doing with it,
Yeah, and as we've learned just by collaborating in this group is, homelessness is not isolated to one specific reason. Everybody has their own reason for being homeless. And if you treat it with a blanket response, you're probably going to be somewhat unsuccessful. So I think with that in mind, the homelessness is the challenge. But what I am thankful for is that this is something that I've tried to really get off the ground for quite a long time, even before I became chief. And, for the first time, I really feel like there's at least positive progression. And, again, having the right people is certainly the key to I don't know if we're going to solve it, but maybe we fix it a little bit, right?
One of the things I've heard you say is, homelessness isn't necessarily a police issue in the way that you guys can't fix it like with your normal tools, whatever those might be. I mean, arresting isn't going to fix anything, first and foremost. Like,
correct.
Even I know our local sheriff's office has a mandate in there if they find a homeless camp to slash tents if they find them. And I mean, on one hand, I understand when people, somebody probably owns that property, or even if it's public land, it's like, okay, but if you uproot a homeless camp from one place, they're going to go live somewhere else. And if they were in a little unit there, my biggest thing with them is I see them I know where one is down at the point where two highways split off, and it's like, they've got trash there, there's shopping carts laying on their side, and then they stuck one of those reflectors on a stake. I'm like, guys, quit marking it to show where you're at. Keep it clean, keep it simple. As long as you kind of keep to yourself and don't harm the area around you, I think you're going to find yourselves a nice place to hang out without being bothered. But I think probably most of the sheriff deputies don't want to do that, but if they're commanded to, they're probably going to follow their orders. But that to me doesn't feel like a solution that's going to help anything or anyone for that matter. And so you guys have a different approach. I mean, you want to try to work with the community partners to say, what are some options and what can we do? And specifically when your officers, I mean, you guys see more of it maybe even than people that work in the churches and centers do, because you guys are coming across these people all over town, and your hearts have got to break for it, just like mine does or anyone else's does. You want to find a solution. You want to find the answer, and we all know there isn't the answer. And so the answer is all these people coming together. Instead of you doing your little thing and you doing your little thing and me doing my little thing, how can we partner together and work it out?
And that has always been my frustration with homelessness is there's a lot of different groups out there that do really good things. But they kind of want to keep it. They kind of want to keep it to themselves. And I always felt like if you can pool those resources and make sure people understand, some of them overlap, sure, but some of them have very unique
Yeah.
situations that can help in a different way. And
Well, I mean, like even Lawrence is one of the guys that he's kind of like he has a ministry. He calls it Food and Fellowship,
yeah,
but his whole goal is he would rather work. He'd rather um, identify a couple individuals who maybe are ready for some change, some positive change in their life,
yeah,
and he'll try to help get them there. But then there's only so much that he can do. But by the time they're ready, maybe they need to get cleaned up. Well, we can send them over to our friends at the thrift shop on North Avenue.
right,
That'll give them some clothes. We can send them to Ernest to get a haircut. They can get a shower over at Healing Hearts. Yeah, they got to travel around a little bit, but then we got them ready. Now there's people that'll help them with their resume. We can get them connected with like Antoine or somebody at Career Source that'll get them, actually into a job. They'll provide job training. Career Source is kind of one of those things that I think is underutilized, where they actually train people and place them in a job, and they actually pay their salary for, I think it's like 180 hours or 160 hours. Their first few weeks in that job is actually paid for through Career Source, and their training is ongoing through that time. And so that's providing a service to that business, but it's also giving somebody that opportunity to have that job and get their hand up.
yeah.
And that's way better than 1,000 handouts,
No, and I totally understand what you're saying, but obviously we know when we're talking about homelessness, we're talking about substance abuse,
Yeah.
alcoholism, mental health, and when you're trying to get someone prepared to get out and get a job and housing.
You got to deal with those other things.
Yeah,
too,
absolutely.
though.
If they don't have those basic abilities, those functions, then it's hard for them to get a job so the alternative is living on the streets.
Living on the streets, petty crime.
Right.
One of the things that I had heard, and I don't have any statistics on this whatsoever. I'll listen to statistics and then forget them immediately, and just kind of remember the idea behind them. And that's, that there was on days when there's not meal services for the homeless population, whether it's a cooked meal or a sandwich meal or a food pantry that's open of some kind. On those days, maybe it's a lot of times it's on the weekends. None of these groups are active. That's where like petty theft in like the little convenience stores and grocery stores with just food items happens. It's like a spike in that,
Yeah.
because they're like, well, I'm hungry and I'm going to eat and I don't have any money.
Right.
And so it's like, what are some of the things that we can all work on? There might be somebody that's like, okay, well, I don't have the time maybe to spend a day at Healing Hearts Cafe or working at this or
Right.
that group. But yet, maybe there's a church, and I know there are, that they go down to Zephyr Park and they have a meal that's available.
Right.
And, that's going to help prevent somebody from, I'm not saying that they have to, but feeling like they have to go steal something to feed their stomach,
Right.
And they might have some other bad choices that they made, whether it's a substance or something like that,
Right.
that if they would get off of that, they could,
Yeah.
But let's work on that once we get some food in their stomach,
Sure. Yep. And truthfully, I think you're right, but I think there are some individuals that would choose to
Oh, yeah.
whether
Stay
it's
there.
drink or abuse narcotics
Right.
over eating.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest challenge in homelessness is, how do you get past those issues to get people homeless into a normal,
Yeah.
societal function, work, pay the bills, someplace to
And
live.
it is tough. I mean, it
Yeah.
is tough, so one of the other things that I'm able to work in is we've got me and another pastor in town have a small lawn company, lawn and landscaping, and we've hired a lot of people that I probably like don't pay attention to this. I don't, like if people knew like, oh, this is who you're putting out on my yard,
Right.
like, wow, that's their history. And I'm not talking like violent offenses and
Sure.
stuff, but people that do have struggles with substance abuse and things like that.
Right.
And I tell them like, I'm not drug testing you. I don't tell them I don't background check them, but I don't really do that. Look, I can get a read on them. I know.
Sure.
And you got to be honest. Like by the time somebody says, "Hey, I think I'm going to pick up a weed eater and carry that for 8 hours out in 100-degree heat," they probably don't have a ton of options.
Correct.
And so I'm not. We've had some really good folks that are real clean, but I mean, there's a good chance that they've got some reason that they don't have a different job that's maybe not as just backbreakingly intensely hot and tiring. But we've had a couple people that we've poured into their lives and tried to help them and tried to help them see progress in their lives, only to have them regress. I mean, we had this one. It was this lady that was working with us, and she was a good worker. And then we wouldn't see her for a couple days, and then she ended up in the hospital. And I don't know if it was an interaction that from a drug that she took, or if it was an actual medical thing that happened, but she never came back to work after that. I mean, well, one time she was actually in the hospital once and came back to work. The second time she never came back. And I have a feeling she probably got maybe given prescriptions while she was there, and then it got her back onto that. I don't really know. I bumped into her one time since then, and she seemed okay. But yet at the same time, it's like, that's a hard thing to get away from, once that's part of your life. So with her, I think she didn't necessarily want to stay in substance abuse, but I think it was just one of those things that just kept knocking on her door all the time. And she didn't have enough support. And the house she lived in, I think you're familiar with it down there on the south end of town, where we had another situation with the guy that owned the house was trying to get it cleaned up. She lived in that house.
Okay.
I'm not trying to share too much about it, but you're familiar with
I know
it.
which one you're talking
and so
about.
the struggle of where she lived and
Absolutely.
everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's only so much that could happen at that point.
Right.
And it's like, it'd be easy for us to all kind of throw up our hands when we get those situations and say, well, it's hopeless. So, but it's not. And we're going to find those folks, those individuals that do want to get better, and they just don't know how to.
Correct.
And so that's worth our time and effort, isn't it? I mean, it really is.
I think so. And who better than the individuals that have the most stake is people in the community.
Yeah. Well, I mean, isn't that something though? Like if you live here, and not just maybe like transient for a couple years or a year or less. Like if you actually are putting down roots in this community, you have a vested interest. Even if you don't care about people, even if you just have a cold heart towards individuals and their plight, you still have a vested interest to see this homelessness issue solved.
Sure.
And so if people would even get that, even with the total lack of compassion, if they would get that understanding that, because we deal with the NIMBY situation, not in my backyard.
Right.
And if people would just tone that down about 90%, like.
Yeah, and truthfully, that mentality kind of, when I say homelessness is not a police issue, I mean that not so much, hey, we don't want to deal with it, is we shouldn't be the only one forced to deal with it.
Yes.
It's a community effort to help combat that issue.
And of course, you're asked by, folks in city government, they're like, hey, we've got this issue, can you fix it?
Correct.
And that's not blaming them on anything, but it's like the city government isn't, to the best of my knowledge, creating a bureau or a department or a liaison that's fixing that. They're simply saying, hey, here you go. And you're like, well, we can't address all these things.
Right.
At least, I mean, maybe with resource officers and funding and programs you could, but is that really what the police force should be tasked with? And that's why we have these community partners.
Yeah, and truthfully, because I think you are talking about, there is a cost involved, and that's some of the things that we talk about is, lack of resources.
Yeah.
And that has always been some of my frustration with homelessness, particularly on the east side of the county.
East Pasco County is notoriously bad for services.
So, I mean, do we sit around and wait for the resources to come?
Right.
No, I mean, I think you have to, as a community leader, I think you have to step up and get the resources here. Make people understand the importance of having them here. Why do you need them? And I don't, with all of our growth here in Zephyrhills over the last, several years, I don't think that it takes, a whole lot of intelligence to understand that, with growth becomes additional problems. And I promise you, we are not the only community that's facing homelessness issues.
And isn't one of the concerns that people have, whether it's founded or not, they're concerned that if we have too many services, that we'll actually start attracting more
Sure.
homeless people over. And
Sure.
maybe that's true, but wouldn't that be cool if we were so good at helping solve the issue that that we that
Yeah.
we sourced in more people
Right.
and actually helped clean them up and send them out? I mean, wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, it's a tricky topic.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think, certainly, probably a small percentage of homeless will take advantage of the resources that are here.
Yeah.
And that's where, as a community, we identify those people, and we recognize that they're not going to seek help.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you give up either.
And that's, you're right, and that's where our friend Don Anderson of the Homeless Coalition in
Right.
Pasco County has said, there's times where relocating is the best thing for that person
Sure.
and the community.
Correct.
Because they might have families somewhere, like maybe up in Pensacola or over in Georgia or wherever, or even farther than that. And if we can get the funds for a bus ticket for them to get them there, if we check some references and make sure they have that help, that resource or that person there that will take care of them. Maybe that's what it takes to get this person onto a
Sure.
good path. And so that might be the best thing we can do for them and the community is actually ship them out somewhere else.
Sure.
But that's not always the answer.
And as we've seen, a lot of homeless have an income.
Yeah.
It's not enough to pay the high rent or high
Right.
mortgage.
Well,
So-
more likely than not, they'd have something, and it's usually
Sure.
some kind of SNAP benefits or food stamps as they used to be called,
Right.
and like probably a disability in check, which is
Right.
honestly like $700 to $800 at the most.
Yeah.
And you can't even put 4 people making that much living in a place and live off of it.
Right.
And we've seen especially with the way housing market prices are up, rent prices are up, and one of the things that's happened, and I know you're aware of this, but one of the things that's happened is people that live in a rental house or rental unit, their landlord that owned it, maybe they've had it for 10 or 15 years and it's practically paid off or paid
Right.
for, but now they've realized they can sell it for twice what it was worth 5
Yeah.
years ago. And so they say, hey, you know what? I'm tired. I made my money back 2 times over now. And now if I can sell it, I can
Yeah.
either invest this in something else or I can buy my retirement home or whatever.
Right.
And that's not necessarily heartless on their part, but
No.
the end effect is somebody else buys it, the rent goes double, and now
Right.
those tenants are kicked out. Or somebody bought it that wants to move into it, and so
Right.
it's no longer a rental unit.
Correct.
A ton of different reasons, but that's one of the recent, I think, spikes. And so a lot of these folks that we're seeing now that are coming, at least knocking on our door here at the church, or my wife works over at the Samaritan Project,
Right.
and she gets a lot of this, is people that are living out of their vehicles. And
Yeah.
they're skipping from parking lot to parking lot trying to stay under the radar, not get kicked out or whatever. But they have a car, they're trying to keep it running and keep insurance on it so they don't get in trouble that way.
Yep.
But all their belongings they can handle are in there because they can't afford a roof like they used to just a few months ago.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's tough. I mean, our solution there is we got to come up with new solutions that we don't even know yet.
Right. And that's the importance of coming together as
Yeah.
community, is to share those ideas.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to come up with something that we're just going to say, yeah, I think that's the idea that's going to help.
Yeah.
Or several ideas, or we realize it's not going to work. But not talking about it and not putting things into action doesn't help it either.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And so we've got to ask some difficult questions, I
Sure.
think. Probably some of those questions, are going to be uncomfortable for people in city government or city council to answer. And I understand that there would be a desire not to have some conversations in the public forum.
Sure.
I've been to city council meetings where I'm just laughing. I'm like,
Right.
buddy, you're not, somebody that signed up to speak or something. I'm like, I hear you, but this is not where you're going to get resolution to this particular issue.
Sure.
And so I don't even know if the city government has the right vehicle, and I'm not just talking Zephyrhills, but any community. I don't know if they have the right vehicle to have those conversations, if maybe we've got to address it in a new way and say, all right, how can we sit down and collaborate together? Things like, so you and I have talked before about what I called affordable housing, and I realize that's kind of like a buzzword,
Right.
for law
Yeah.
enforcement, especially because when you hear community or affordable housing, you hear like Section 8 communities and things like that, and you know that, was it like 80 or 90% of your calls for domestic and theft and things like that?
But at the same time, obviously we know that it's necessary.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
And when I say affordable housing, I just simply think housing that people can afford.
Sure.
And so it's like, why are we're building houses that are $400,000, and I'm looking at that, I'm
correct.
like, that's but taxes, insurance, proper mortgage insurance, all that stuff. Rates are climbing back up again. You're looking at $2,000 a month before you've even turned utilities on.
Oh yeah.
Or bought groceries or paid for your kids' needs or whatever. So I'm like, man, common folks can't afford that. Wages haven't gone up that much, and groceries are $50 a week more than they used to be. It's like you just can't do it. And so we got to be willing to approve housing, units and developments that are. And I know the era of $170,000 quote unquote starter home is gone at this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But like, what about multi, maybe quadplexes, things like that can be purchased or rented a lot more affordably than what we're building right now. But that's not as and I don't want to. I've got the people that run the community. I consider them friends. I'm not saying that they're enemies, but they've got to, I think, sometimes pull back a little bit from some of the responsibilities of governing a community a certain way and say, how can we address this in a way that's beneficial to all of our citizens and not just like the targeted ones that are moving in. And I don't think that they're coming at it with a bad heart or intention at all. I don't see that at all. But I think that from my perspective, what I see, the phone calls that I get all the time, the ones that break my heart when somebody's saying, I lost my place to stay, I lost this, I was staying in a camper in a 55 and up place, but we got sick and we couldn't afford the lot rent and they kicked us out. Now I'm in a camper. There's a couple of them that I know, and you probably run into them that are around town. They're pulling this big fifth wheel all over town, just going from lot to lot, hoping to stay somewhere.
Well, I think that's,
and I don't know their situation. I haven't talked with them.
Sure, but I think that's the
common.
difference. And I'm not placing blame anywhere, but police officers run into those situations.
Yeah.
They see the struggles that people are going through, homelessness. So I think unless you really see it with your own eyes and your own ears, sometimes it's hard to understand.
Well, that's back to that empathy thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and how do you convince? It's uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
So how do you take the general public and put them in a generally uncomfortable situation?
Yeah. Well, you guys do ride-alongs, right?
We do.
I mean, that can help.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
So if somebody's sitting here, whether they're critical of the situation that society is in,
Right.
or even critical of maybe the police force just because they watch their TV too much and see the headlines from other parts of the country, a ride-along might help them,
I will say that, the cop shows are getting a little bit more, a better idea of how police work actually works when you're talking about technology and stuff like that. But, it hurts us because we don't have our own lab at the police department to process that piece of evidence in 2 minutes or less.
Listen, this is one of my things, like when they're solving a murder or a big crime in like a few hours or a day, I'm like, no, it doesn't. Like those things take weeks and months, potentially. I mean, depending on the stuff. I give my wife a hard time because she gets up early and watches reruns of Matlock, and I get it, like it's fun, but they had this trial where he went to trial like 3 days, like they were in trial proceedings, and then they had the funeral for the victim during that. I'm like, no way.
Right.
You wouldn't even have your lawyer figured out by that time, So, and she knows that, but it's just like, why did they write a show like this? Why did they pass that off as if it could even be close to reality?
To fit it in 30 minutes.
Exactly. And so these TV shows, they do that too, and it's like, don't believe it just because it's on the internet or on a TV show.
Right.
Like, have some reality in your thinking. Have a little common sense.
Yeah. But at the same time, you bring up a good point, right? So let's say somebody might express some displeasure with the police, right? So sometimes the best way to kind of help them understand we go through on a daily basis is for them to see what we do.
Yeah.
And I have always encouraged people to do ride-alongs, because you just never know in a day-to-day interaction what a police officer has gone through.
Yeah.
And when they get to you, they may have had to deal with 2 or 3 pretty traumatic incidents.
And we are all human, when it comes to, I mean, you might be the best at trying to work with empathy or respect or dignity and all those things, treating people with dignity, but you might have had, 4 absolute jerks or whatever, the last, and it just gets to you. I mean, look, I'm a pastor and I'm supposed to be nice and loving and kind all the time, right? And then, but I mean, there might have been something like my kid was a brat getting ready and I was in a hurry to my first meeting and she made me late for it and that sets me off. And, then I get a text message from somebody that's not happy or somebody's lawn that didn't get cut right or whatever in the business that I run. And I'm like, and then somebody gets the brunt of that and I got to go back and apologize. But, you guys don't get given that same grace sometimes, so yeah, that's tough, isn't it? I mean, that's hard it's like it takes extra time to undo anything or work, kind of overcome any bad examples.
Plus, you don't know that person's prior experience
That's
with
true.
law enforcement.
Yeah,
they
that's
may
true.
have gone into that interaction
Preconceived,
probably already kind of determining how it's going to go down. So they put up a defense automatically.
Well, we see this on like YouTube videos that are like, some of those people are just, they're trying to get a reaction out of an officer. And there's people, I mean, I would guess there's people that start out any interaction with the police with an attitude just because.
Yeah, but again, it's always about our first contact.
Yeah.
How do we interact with them?
Yeah.
It's easy when somebody is in a defensive mode and you can usually see it in their body language. So it's easy to go up there and make contact with someone and they're already upset. So your defense goes up.
Yeah.
Right? So, those are some of the things that we're constantly learning as law enforcement officers to de-escalate situations is, hey, you know what? I'm not going to raise my level to past theirs because you already know they're here. So,
and even simple things. I mean, I'm not saying any of your officers do this, but like, if you feel, every officer deserves to go home to their family at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Period.
Sure.
And so, if they were in a situation where they might have felt threatened by somebody and, because you're stepping into stuff, you don't know what's going to happen. And so, if you unsnap, whether it's a pepper, do you guys do pepper spray? Do you have that?
No, we may bring it back.
Okay.
Yes.
But I mean, like, you got the, tasers or stun guns or something, and so whether it was that or a sidearm or whatever it might be, if you were unsnap just because you need to be ready for that, even that could be perceived as threatening by somebody.
Yep.
And so it's like what you're saying, it kind of makes sense. You don't want to go like beyond what their level is, of in that situation, because you might be considered as the one that escalated it, even though you were just wanting to go home to your family that night, which is understandable, for sure.
When we talk about the body cameras, right? So even
like even turning those on, because I mean those aren't running constantly, right? They have to activate.
Yeah, you have to activate them.
Yeah. And so that can be considered a move by someone almost.
But at the same time, yes, they've been great. They've been great about capturing interactions. But it doesn't always tell the whole story.
For sure.
So, that's what is becoming so important in the line of work is, using all those tools to your advantage, but understanding that, talking is really the best way to keep things from getting out of hand. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some individuals, there's nothing you're going to be able to say.
Yeah.
I will say I have watched body camera videos and our officers are extremely patient, probably more patient than I would be. So I give them a lot of credit for that.
Yeah. So one other thing that I think, and hopefully we'll continue this another time.
Yeah.
But one of the things I want to talk about for a few minutes that's just an experience that I had that was a really good one with your police force, and I think we had some Dade City officers, maybe some Pasco sheriffs too. Was and I don't remember how long ago it was, but sometime after George Floyd was killed, and the country was in a justifiable uproar, and I think there was a lot of things that were simmering or boiling, and that was like our breaking point where a lot of people said, okay, I can't just ignore this or think that there's somebody else's problem anymore.
Right.
And so we had, we saw all over the country, some were protests, some were rallies, some were just downright riots. And I'm not interested in talking whether those were good or bad, but that was what was going on in our country, and
Sure.
we all remember that. So when it came to Zephyrhills, there were some people that said, we want to have an event. And we ended up calling it a unity rally. And I say I wasn't part of running it, but I was invited and was glad to be there.
Right.
You and your officers were there serving people, which is part of your thing,
Right. Yeah.
handing out water, handing out masks. That was at the beginning of COVID, fairly early in
Yeah.
that. So handing out masks to people. We were out in Zephyr Park, and it was just kind of funny because a few people had some signs. They're like, we need to change now and this and that.
Sure.
And it's like, I wanted to say, well, we are already doing that. And I understand their sentiment goes for perhaps their minority brethren and sisters around
Absolutely.
the country.
Sure.
And I get the sentiment that's like they're feeling other people's pain.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that that everybody has an easy road or an easy journey in our community. There was a video that was produced a couple years back when Steve Spina was the city manager, and he had, I think, helped make that happen. And it was, I think it's still on the City of Zephyrhills website. It's featured
so.
there, but
Yeah.
it's what is it called? Like African American in Zephyrhills being, I forget the title of it, but it's basically like the journey, of different African Americans in Zephyrhills over time,
Right.
and some of the struggles they had gone through, and some of the things that have improved, and some of the insane things like the opposition to renaming Sixth Avenue as Martin
Right.
Luther King Jr.
Sure.
And it's like, why are we worried about this? And it was a regional news item on the nightly news, and it's like, and so it's a very good video. I'll actually throw a link to it in the notes for this show. It was eye-opening for me too, and it actually put a desire in my heart to reach out to some of the ethnic churches in our community.
Yep.
And I tried to reach out to several of them, but again, with COVID, what it was, and they weren't having in-person services and all that. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I'm like, okay, I need to renew that, because I was dead set determined that I was going to be part of the people that like bridged that gap, you know, and that I would use whatever resources I had in my church, my position, whatever it is, to see that healing happen. But I remember at that unity rally, just how neat it was to see the interaction of our officers, which, again, we already talked about. You've got a very racially diverse police force. And so, you guys have already tried to figure out, I'm sure it's an ongoing thing, but trying to figure out how to have, unity within the force. But
Sure.
I saw it on display as you guys actually cared for people in our community that were hurting. I mean, these are people that carry pain and things that they've suffered through or seen others suffer through, and is a very real, in their mind, a potential threat that they might incur someday. Like, if it can happen to George Floyd, it could happen to me.
Absolutely.
And I think you guys understand that. Like, I think you understand that, and that's something that you have tried to instill in your officers.
Yeah, and I think what you saw that day, what was great, in my opinion, is that, I think the African American community was hurting, and they wanted a voice.
Yeah.
But they came to us and said, "Hey, we want to do this. We want to let you know."
Yeah.
I said, "That's great. We're going to help you."
Did they expect that or not?
I don't know if they did or not,
Okay.
but the fact that they had enough respect
Yeah.
to say, "Hey, you know what? I'm letting you know."
Yeah.
Because we don't want things to get out of hand.
Right.
And we partnered with them. In my
Yes.
opinion, we said,
absolutely.
we'll do everything we can to make sure that incident, that event is safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, and part of that was keeping, because there was a lot of, I don't even know whether it was any bit true or not, but that there was groups that were busing in from other cities
Sure.
to instigate problems.
Right.
And so that was, whether that was a real or perceived threat, I don't know,
Right.
but you guys
I
were
think so.
ensuring that that wasn't going to happen here.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
this was going to be a positive and peaceful event.
Yeah, it was a real threat, and I think the organizers did an outstanding job of
Yeah.
recognizing
They
we
didn't
don't
want it either.
that.
They didn't want it either because they
Right.
knew that that's counterproductive to what
Right.
they're actually trying to do.
Yeah. But look, I've been asked a lot about, what do you do in your community to establish those relationships? Well, first of all, that's ongoing.
Yeah.
But second, it's always going back to the mission. I've got 20 years of building relationships in this community, and they don't. I don't think you ever. You don't forget about that stuff. In the best, I don't want to say I'm giving advice to any other law enforcement agency, but really the best
I think you have some to give.
is really you're always building those relationships, and it's not just, oh yes, it's community meetings and stuff like that. It's about, again, treating people with dignity and respect. If you focus on that, and don't get me wrong, we're not immune to having a situation like George Floyd.
Yeah.
But you know what? I feel at least somewhat comfortable that if we did have that situation, the community trusts me to take the appropriate action, and I trust the community to come to me and tell me that they're not happy.
Yeah.
And let's fix it together.
And you've taken steps before that, though. I mean, I say before that, like you've taken steps to avoid that. You know, as far as who you hire, what you instill in them. You've taken steps in ongoing trainings.
Yes.
And in different initiatives that the police department takes part in. To ensure that as much as possible, you won't have an officer that's willing to do that.
Yeah, we were, interestingly enough, before George Floyd, we were actually, in fact, Captain Roberts was the one that was actually doing the training for us, was doing de-escalation training.
Yeah.
Before that even, before George Floyd even happened. So we were kind of already practicing some of those, techniques, because we thought that it was important to how we want to do police work. So, and I'm not saying I, came up with a new idea. I just felt like it was important to our agency.
Sure.
And heck, I wasn't even chief at the time. I just said, Chief Shears and I said, this is something that's going to be important. And, we still, to this day, we take that as very important to what we're trying to do. We teach it in-house.
Yeah.
We have subject matter experts that are teaching it.
Oh, that's cool.
So
like you basically saw this and you said there's not really a necessarily at least maybe an easily approachable comprehensive program for what we need, so we're going to create it.
Correct.
I get that. I mean, I like writing curriculum or things that we're going to do here in our church.
Right.
And I do stuff like churches, 10 or 20 times our size start doing. I'm like, well, it's not that I don't trust what's out there, but I want to customize something to what we need.
Yeah.
And so I'll take the time and write it.
That's exactly why I wanted to do it in-house, because when you're using someone else's curriculum, you don't control the content.
Yeah.
But when you're doing it with your own people, your own officers, your own staff, you have control over what's being taught and customizing it to what you're trying to do. And unfortunately, Captain's no longer with us, but he was just absolutely dynamic at it. Now he's perfect.
I actually didn't know that. So what's he up to now?
Yeah, so he took another job
Okay.
with another agency,
Okay.
and it was a great opportunity for him. And I
Because
wish
he's been around a long time too
yeah,
here.
yeah, he grew up here, so
Right.
obviously he's
He was coaching over at the high school and everything.
lots
So
of community
yeah,
connections. Obviously sorry to see him
for
go. I
sure.
loved him
How
to
long
death.
ago did that happen?
Man, it's been a few months.
Okay, all right,
So,
yeah. Somehow I missed that. I don't. I stay off like the community
Yeah.
Facebook page, and
Yeah.
the only time I find out about news is when somebody tells me or I see some memes on Facebook
Right.
when I'm looking for memes to make me laugh, and I'm like, wait a minute, what just happened? You know,
Yeah.
like apparently the Supreme Court's working on Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
I found out by a few angry tweets or
Yeah.
somebody sent. I was like, oh my goodness, what's going on? You know, so then I look it up by news sources that might have some actual news,
Right.
not just opinions. So I actually get a lot of my news from memes. Like that sounds terrible, but
Right.
memes will actually keep you somewhat informed about what's happening.
Absolutely.
Then you can go and dig into
Yeah,
it.
because you'll
like-
see it and you'll be like, oh, what are they talking about?
I mean, the night after that, whatever, I don't even care about the awards shows, but Oscars or whatever
Right.
it is, the night after that, the slap happened,
Right.
I woke up that morning, I don't care anything about that show, and I woke up, though, and I see these memes about Chris Rock, and I'm
Yeah.
like, what's happening? And so I started looking it up, I'm like, oh my goodness,
Right.
that's huge, you know, and then the
Yeah.
world was, you know, just talking about it for, it seemed like 3 days about
Yeah.
one actor slapping another, and who would have thought we'd get that much airplay off of it, but I wouldn't have caught that on the news or anything. I caught it from a meme. So
Yeah.
that's how I get my news these days.
Unfortunately, I think that's the curse or the beauty of social media. So whichever way you want.
Yeah,
to look at it.
exactly. Yeah. Well, at least we're able to like make light of it, you know, have a little humor about
Sure.
it first, but then,
Right.
you know, it really drives you into the nitty gritty of like, wait a minute. So what's at stake with one A-lister slapping another one?
Sure.
Really unprovoked, you know, who was doing his, I mean, not to get into the whole thing, but Chris Rock was doing the job he was hired to do, right? You
Right,
know,
of
and so it's
course,
like, and if you want to say, oh, well, you know, he shouldn't have made fun of her for having a disease, like, well,
You could
I know she had a
understand.
disease.
Right, you could
like,
understand Will Smith's
all of it, you know, I get
right.
all of it. And so, and maybe that's something too, is like, we've got to be willing to agree or not, whether they're right or wrong, we've got to be able to at least understand someone's perspective, another
Sure.
person. And I think once we do that, once we take the effort to actually say like, well, why would you even think that that was okay to do? Or why would you think
Right.
that that was noble to do? Because as firm as you might be in like the Chris Rock camp, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, he's defending his family, he's standing up.
Sure.
It's like, okay, you know, like I don't see that as my point of view on it, and yet I can see how that's something that, you know, there's others that don't stand up at all for their family. Maybe
Correct.
somebody, like you were talking about, somebody's prior experiences, maybe whether it was with law enforcement or homelessness or whatever it might have been that we talked about. Somebody might have had a father that never stood up for them.
Yeah.
You know, they never had anybody defend them for anything, and they saw that as like a knight in shining armor.
Sure.
And it's like, okay, that's a different perspective that I don't necessarily agree with.
Right.
But at least I don't just write off another human being because of their
Absolutely.
opinion on it.
That's why
How much time do we have in this world, you know?
I'll be honest with you. Law enforcement has taught me that, but that's why I try not to even give opinions, because you don't know all the facts.
Yeah. And I haven't asked you for too many opinions because I don't.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's not going to help much.
No.
I just want to know your experiences, your expertise,
Right.
and that's kind of what I try to do with this podcast. Is it's like, I didn't say, you know, we're talking about riots, George Floyd, things like that.
Right.
I'm not sharing my opinion. You know, I mean, maybe I let on a little bit, but that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to find out yours either on all of those situations, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter so much. But do you treat people with dignity and respect?
Absolutely.
Do you try to have empathy in those that you live with? You know, these are things that whether you're on the Zephyrhills Police Department force or anything else in life,
Absolutely.
those are things that we should all have more of in our life.
Well, and truly, I try to carry that same mission in my personal life.
Yeah, it'll carry you far. I mean, carry that in the door when you go home. Don't
Sure.
leave it in your you know,
Right.
on your very beautiful new unmarked
Yeah.
thing. Looks sharp, man.
Yeah. Thank you.
It does. So thanks, City of Zephyrhills. You know,
Yes.
it's not just city works, public works that gets new trucks. You gotta,
The hotel saying that.
oh man, yeah,
I mean, being chief, I should have some perk, right?
right. I love it. Oh, that's good. So I won't post a picture of it or anything.
All right, good.
Yeah, we don't need people like, oh, that's what it is. You
Yeah.
know? But yeah, I was like, oh man, I seen it the other day. I was like, hey, is that? Oh, nice. You know. And then I think I waved one day driving past, and then I realized it was I think Pasco Sheriff's got a couple that are very similar.
Oh, they might. Yeah.
So,
I mean, again, police
right.
cars are all kind of the
You got a
same.
limited number of
Yeah.
or manufacturers that have
Yeah.
interceptor packages, police packages,
Yeah.
stuff like that. But yeah. Oh man, what was it like the good old days where everything was like Crown Vics and Caprice Classics? And
I tell you what,
know what?
I never, my law enforcement career doesn't stem back to the
Well, they had the
Caprice,
Crown Vics though.
but
Yeah.
I love the Crown Vics.
Oh man, yeah.
Really a classic police car, durable, and,
Yeah.
and really, other than the fact that, of course, sedans these days don't carry a lot.
Right.
It was the perfect police
Oh,
vehicle.
yeah.
So, but just like everything else, the good stuff gets phased out. And get try something new.
Is it somewhere in the city that they have one, or is it privately owned? There's like an old like Caprice, like an old ZPD.
Yeah, we
Caprice.
actually, that car was driven by Chief Shears.
Okay.
So I'll forgive me, I don't remember who it was, but someone locally said, you know what, we're gonna fix it up.
Okay.
And we're gonna make it look like
Like when it was in
yes.
when it was new.
And they did. So we've kept that, and we bring it.
Okay.
with
Yeah, I've seen it in a
parades
couple of
and
shows and things.
car shows and
yeah.
stuff like that. So
Yeah. Got the old the chrome with the black side.
oh yeah,
There was like
you gotta roll the window down.
well, I mean, there's just little details. So I grew up outside of Flint, Michigan, and it was like General Motors, everything.
Yep.
Because down in Dearborn, you got Ford Motor Company, Chrysler is around there somewhere. They had their big headquarters building. You'd see them. But in Flint, it was like everybody either worked for General Motors or one of their suppliers that built parts for them. So anyway, I was like this GM car nerd, just growing up because it was life,
Right.
So to this day, I can still see cars from like the 80s or early 90s, and I just know, like, I don't even know why I know, but some little detail about it, I'm like, oh, well, that was a such and such year. That was when they did this. And I was
Right.
like, how do I remember this stuff? It's useless knowledge. But I remember, like, throughout the years, there's different little things that always, like, you can do an unmarked one, but there's little tells that
Yeah.
are still like, oh, that's a police package. So
Absolutely.
somebody that's been on the wrong side of minor police interactions, like a time or two, that worked
Yeah.
for me was he told me that the white, like the Explorer ones, they don't have the little roof bars that the roof rack would mount to.
Right.
They're shaved down. It's just flat all the way across the top. I was like, oh my goodness. So they can unmark it, but you can
Sure.
still tell. And then
Yeah, there's always some sort of like
Yeah.
ghost image there.
yeah, exactly. But then there's then I saw one that like Ford has a package now for regular consumers that has that too. Because
Yeah.
somebody's like, hey, that looks cool, smooth like that. Why can't we get those? So I guess they made it available. But it's like around when I lived up in Tennessee, they started having a ton of just regular civilian vehicles that they would deck out with hidden lights, behind grills and in the,
Yep.
but you couldn't tell them. And I was looking for them because back then I drove way too fast. Like I was always trying to avoid tickets by slowing down when I would see a cop, that whole game. And I got broken to that when I moved to Zephyrhills, by the way, because it's like everywhere it's 30 miles an hour.
Yeah,
So you might as well
right.
just slow it down. And
Yes.
you're gonna find a perhaps one of our seasonal citizens that comes down in the wintertime that is not in a hurry. And it's best to go slow because they're probably going to pull out in front of you at some point. So you just want to keep an eye out. So I haven't gotten a ticket in many a year.
It's good. Yeah.
I try to
Proud
live
of
on the
you.
good side
Yeah.
of the law. But
Yeah. The unfortunate part is,
and I won't
there's-
call you if I
Right.
do get pulled over. I won't say, hey, I'm going to call the chief. I won't.
I
I'm not
appreciate
that
that
guy.
too.
I might call you later. I might call you later and say, hey, what can I do to get out of this? Can I do some community service? Can the officer not show up to the court that day?
Yeah, sometimes name dropping the chief is gonna work against you. You just
Yeah,
never
exactly.
know.
Like he's like, no, definitely write him up. Like he knows better, and he did it anyway. Oh man, I did notice that I let my truck tags go expired. Like I haven't been driving it very much. I've got a Jeep, and I've been driving that. And I was like, I went out to my truck. I was like, oh my goodness, I forgot all about those. I really got to get up to Day City and renew those, you know. So,
Well, when I worked patrol, that was my bread and butter. I always look for expired
oh
tags.
yeah,
Um,
you gotta have like an eagle eye for that too.
well, I used to. Not so much
Not so
anymore.
much now. Yeah.
But
Oh, you see,
yeah,
see my readers.
yeah.
You know, I've been using these lately for reading stuff because I got them for like the blue light blocker, right? Like for the phones
Yep.
and computer screens. And then I was looking for those, and I was like, these had a magnification. I'm like, oh, I don't have to hold stuff out here to read it anymore. I can actually see. So, yeah, I've been doing that. So I'm feeling it.
I used to be able to see them actually traveling. If I was stationary and they're traveling by me at 30 miles per hour, I could
could pick it
tell. I
up.
could see it. But
Wow.
20
what-
years later,
What are some of the biggest tricks you've seen people try to pull to like hide that? Because I've got a couple that I've done back in the day when I was like broke and couldn't afford to renew it and would just try to drive.
well, I don't know if they necessarily try to hide it, but I think it's common to say, hey, I forgot about it,
Yeah.
or hey, didn't get the notice.
Right. You had a
because-
birthday. I mean,
Right, I know, but
Yeah.
people become accustomed to that
sure,
notice.
sure.
And I think,
Well, as that judge told me once, ignorance of the law does not excuse breaking it.
no, and that is the truth, and that I would say the same thing. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I think we've all been guilty at some point or another
Oh, yeah.
of forgetting about those things.
Well, shoot, I had sat down to breakfast at the Chamber of Commerce breakfast a while back with the guy that was a warden at the prison, Hoskins, and we were sitting there at the table and we were talking, and he was talking about, and it's really interesting the way he approaches, being the warden at the prison at the correctional institute, and the one that we've got down the road here is I don't know if they call it geriatric, but it's an elderly population, and so he's got a little bit more interesting than some of what we might think we're familiar with on TV or whatever of what a prison looks like. But he was talking about some of the compassion in which he treats people and the honor that he treats people with, and he said when it comes down to it, we've all committed felonies, we just haven't all gotten caught. And I thought, huh, okay. So I actually looked up like,
I mean, I wouldn't go that far,
I'm like, well, what are common felonies? So I think I actually did a felony yesterday. I was just opening my mail and I wasn't looking at it, and I realized like, what? This doesn't have anything to do with me. And I look and
Somebody
for
else.
somebody else, and they put it in my box, and it's like, okay, so I just taped it up and put it back. But it's like, whoops, that's. I mean, I didn't really do it though, but yeah, it's like, okay, I mean, so technically we've all committed a felony,
Sure.
okay, but yeah, nobody's getting prosecuted for that. But it was just an
Right.
interesting thing to hear a prison warden say that. I'm like,
Right.
well, if you're saying it, it must be true. But yeah,
And I think sometimes that gets forgotten.
Yeah.
That again, everybody makes mistakes.
Sure.
Doesn't mean you're a bad person. Just there was intent to commit crime, and then there's
well, there was times, so I was joking about it and asking because there was times when I used to tow when my tag was expired and I didn't have the money to do it. I was broke as could be, and I had a trailer with like a toolbox on the front, and so I would tow that to like at least make it harder to see it, is what, in my opinion. I'm not saying
I
it
gotta
made
jot
sense,
that down.
but, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. But when I grew up in Michigan, I had it was a winter time, and my income came from plowing snow, driveways and parking lots. We had this one winter where it snowed on Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, like 2 inches of snow, just enough that like 2 inches was the minimum we go out
Right.
and plow. So I made some money off of that snow. I'm like, yeah, early money for the season. And then it didn't snow again until after New Year's. And so like we're counting on that for income.
Yeah.
And so I was just so broke. And so my January my tags came up for renewal and I just didn't have it. I borrowed money for rent, it was bad. So I took snow and I packed on there. I took a water spray bottle to make sure it wouldn't come off. I iced it on there. I'm like, I've got to drive, but I'm not. So anyway, that's not anything people in Florida are going to be dealing with to hide their expired tag. But that was the extent that I went to still drive my car and not get pulled over for it. But,
Well, and I will tell you that in Florida, your tag can't be obscured.
oh yeah. Oh,
So-
that's the same in Michigan. Like,
Right. So
it was still breaking the law.
correct. No matter what, I
Yeah.
mean, you can still get pulled over. So even if you're trying to hide your decal or
right.
whatever, so
Well, probably if anything else, like when the rest of the car wasn't covered in snow, it ends
Right.
up drawing attention, but I mean, I was 20 years old.
Yeah.
And, you know, the thinky parts aren't fully developed
Right.
yet.
And you're not worried about whether or not I'm obscuring my tag or not
Yeah.
at that point anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Again, it was just, dumb, just dumb thinking. But that's one of the things that I think a lot of times, when you get desperate for whatever the situation, when you get desperate, that's when people start making a lot of bad choices, I think.
Sure.
And so, I've had, I mean, like the guy that took that cover off of the utility box over here is like, why would somebody ride off on a bike with that thing? I don't know what he was going to do with it even, but I can just figure he's in maybe just scrap metal. He's like, well, that's stainless steel. That's worth more than regular iron. I can get $3 out of it.
right,
or
there's
something.
a purpose for it.
Yeah.
Whether he was using it first to build something
or maybe it was a good, I mean, it's like a giant pot. I mean, it's like the size of a turkey fryer almost. Like
Right.
maybe he's got a fire and he can cook something in it or warm something up. Like, I don't know.
right.
But desperation a lot of times leads us to make poor life choices.
Sure.
And, sometimes, and perhaps this is something you guys run into, I don't know, but, just kind of extending some grace in one of those situations. I think of the movie Les Miserables, there's like a play and all that stuff, but the movie was, there was a time where the main character had stolen something from a priest, like
Right.
the silverware and everything, but the priest believed in him enough, said, you said in the morning you'd be a new man. Now make sure you go do it. And so
Right.
like through the rest of the movie, he cleans up and becomes a new man. And I think of that as like that one act of mercy, had a big deal. Now, of course, you guys have a law that you're bound to, but there is in certain situations, there's like interpretation or there's leeway, I guess, right? Like,
Yeah, discretion.
discretion. That's what I was looking for. There's discretion
Sure.
around certain things. I mean,
Right.
one of the things that I wish, and this is from like a layperson's perspective, like I'm not in your shoes. And so this would be a time where I might ask your opinion. And if you want to decline from it, that's fine. But I wish that there was, from what I could see, I wish that there was a different approach in our country to handling like minor possession of drugs and things like that. And I also wish, and I tell my employees in the lawn business, I say, what you do after you get off work is your business.
Right.
At 7 a.m. when you show up to work, you need to be sober.
Right.
I don't want anybody that's messed up running equipment on people's yards. But what you do in the afternoon is your business, and I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. If you're interested, I will suggest some healthy things you can do in your life.
Sure.
And so there's things that I believe people should do, but at the same time, I think I've seen where over time some of the ways that some of those crimes, nonviolent crimes, are prosecuted, that I think has actually torn families apart
Sure.
more than it's helped them. Is that something like how would you look at that?
I think you're already starting to see that change.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, law enforcement isn't necessarily making arrests for that stuff.
Right.
It might be a citation instead, or
And so is that where, do you have some discretion in some of those? Like if you
Yes.
showed up, let's say you showed up at like maybe a domestic disturbance or even just a routine traffic stop, and somebody had, a minor possession in the vehicle or at the home, but it wasn't contributing to another crime. Is that something you have some discretion to
yeah, absolutely.
work around?
Yeah. And again, if we're talking about misdemeanor crime, there's
Yeah.
usually some sort of discretion there, and
And all the way up to the judges and things like that in the
Sure.
small courts, for
right.
sure.
And a lot of times we, as law enforcement, we change the way we arrest or
Mm-hmm.
treat situations based on how the courts are ruling,
Yeah.
how the state attorney's office is taking cases.
Yeah, because
So-
part of that is like, is something going to even be prosecuted? You might as well
Correct.
not even arrest it.
Right,
You
it's
know it
a-
won't be prosecuted.
Right, it might be a
And
waste
COVID
of
changed
time.
that a lot too, right? I mean, they
Oh, yeah.
weren't trying anything unless it was like major. I mean,
Well,
they
there
were
was a time
postponing
where we
stuff.
weren't even making arrests.
because why? Yeah, you can't even bring them into the jail.
Correct.
And so it's like,
Right.
yeah,
Stuff that we would have normally arrested for, we weren't arresting
Yeah.
for. And that was an interesting time.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
No, we
Now,
still
is
have
there
charges.
like a phone call that you have to make to the DA's office or something? Like, hey, we've got this situation. Do we need to arrest them or not? Or did they just give you?
Well, they kind of gave us
they gave you
criteria.
criteria? Okay.
Yeah. I can't say that there wasn't a situation where we didn't have to
Yeah.
call, but I mean, didn't mean that they weren't subject to arrest later on.
Sure.
We
You
just
gather the evidence, take
Correct.
down the information
Right.
of what happened, and then submit
and then,
it.
Right, and then
Yeah.
usually there was a warrant issued for their arrest.
Yeah.
So
Man, that's got to be like that's got to be like the worst feeling for that person too. They're like, "Oh, I got, like I'm good. I got out
Sure.
of that fine." And then 30 days later or whatever, there's a warrant for their arrest.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Wait, what?" I thought
well,
that was behind
and I think I would say most law enforcement agencies were pretty clear to say, "Hey, look,
It's still
today's your lucky day. You're not going to jail today, but you're most likely going to."
put some affairs in order because
Right.
it's probably gonna happen.
Correct.
But they're just so backlogged or not doing it right now that it might be a while.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah.
That was an interesting time.
Yeah. So, as most of your world normalized as far as some of those things,
Yeah.
you kind of back to, but was there any permanent like changes or maybe positive outcomes in the whole COVID situation that sucked for everyone? Is there any like just anything that it brought to light? I mean, I know during that time we already talked about George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, things like that, but was there anything else that just some kind of change, maybe even to do with the technology or something, like a lot of businesses went to Zoom meetings like, hey, we're in New York, but you can live in Florida if you want. Like Florida's had a lot of residents that moved
Right.
here based on their business using, during COVID, that was an outcome of it.
Yeah, that was one of the things
Yeah.
we definitely realized. Like, it's pretty easy to get people together on a Zoom call.
Right.
Typically when you would meet, particularly, if I was meeting with the sheriff's office, usually everybody's over on the west side
Driving
of
over
the
the
county,
Land
so I would
Lake or
drive
whatever,
over
yeah.
there, and it makes it a lot easier for us to
Yeah.
have conversations.
And that's a long drive, and you can't just run sirens and get over there. Like you
No.
still have to obey that
Oh,
rule,
yeah.
Oh man. All right, one last thing.
Okay.
If somebody sees, this is a joke. If somebody sees an officer doing something that's absolutely insane, like flip their lights on to get through a light, what do they do about that? Like on, get through a light and get off, like just stuff that we all know, like that was bullcrap. That was
Right. Well, I would certainly ask them to report it to us. There may be an
A reason.
extenuating
Right.
circumstance.
like you're saying we don't know everything because we think we do.
There might be an extenuating circumstance, but
Yeah.
it's always best, and we can always look into it. There's dash cam video, and if they flip their lights on, their camera comes on. So we
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I
we
didn't think about
generally, and even if you had a time, right? You say, "Oh, I saw Officer so and so go through
Sure.
the red light at whatever time." We'll know whether or not they're responding to a call or not. So,
To be fair, the one time I saw that, it was a Pasco County, so it wasn't one of y'all.
all right. Well, again, there might be circumstances.
Hey,
So,
listen, if Sheriff Nako wants to come on and do a podcast, I'd love to have him sitting in that chair and we'll talk to.
yeah.
I'll tell him that it was Zephyrhills that did it, so it's fine.
Oh, okay. Well, I got evidence that says otherwise now. So,
In all reality, I probably never saw it at all, and I'm just making something up, just seeing what what we should do. But listen, this has been a lot of fun, and I think
I appreciate you
we
having
need to maybe wrap up for today and
Sure.
allow some stuff, because I mean, there's other things that I think would be interesting to talk about, and I don't want to spend all that time today. I want to have some stuff left for another time. So
yeah, have me back whenever you're ready.
yeah.
So,
I'll let you know. We're gonna. I got a list of people that I want to run through, and then we'll keep.
Sure.
Just keep going over and over. And then the other thing is, I want to add some more stuff. Showcasing a few local businesses and things like
Yeah.
that too. And so somebody suggested a thing like hey, you could get maybe try 3 or 4 different Cuban sandwiches from different places and rank them. Just fun stuff that we could add to the podcast. It would be kind of neat. On the
I don't mind being a
too.
judge for that.
Yeah.
So,
we could there's one thing I think we need to clear up, and that's cops and donuts. And I think I figured out why that became the reputation. But I want to hear your take on why you think that became the thing that everybody tries to poke fun at cops about.
I'll be honest with you. I don't know where it came from, to be honest with you. I've never researched the history behind it. I'm sure there's a reason for it. I've never been a fan of the stereotype.
Yeah.
But damn, I like donuts. Who doesn't like
Who
donuts,
did, right?
right?
Like, yeah. So here's where I think it all started. I think back in the day when like 7-Eleven was the long houred place,
Yeah.
and nothing was open. It was like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or whatever stuff closed. I don't know when it closed. You would have donut shops that were open at what 4:30 or 5 a.m. for the early crowd headed into the shop or to work or whatever. And so cops that are on the night shift, they've got nowhere to be that's open. They've checked all the doors to make sure everybody locked their business at night in the old day. And so they're going to hang out at the donut shop. And those people want them there for like a little protection because they're there at work, what,
Early
3 a.m.,
morning, right,
and they're like, hey, if you want to show up, and make sure everything's cool, we'll get you some donuts. So I think they just started hanging out in donut shops because that was what was open.
That is a very legitimate explanation behind it.
So I think that's all it was,
Right.
And the reason I figured that out, my dad was a small town police officer for about a decade back in like the 80s and 90s, and he would go to like the 7-Eleven or whatever it was, and just hang out there. Same reason,
Right.
close to closing time or something.
Yeah.
Nothing else going on, and it's a small town. It's dead.
Yeah.
It's like smaller than Zephyrhills, where we roll the sidewalks up at like 8:30 or 9 o'clock here, and so we're like, nah, no, it needs to be out. But they're in this small little community. There's nothing happening. There's no traffic. So he's hanging out at the 7-Eleven, being friends with the employees and eating nachos and stuff from their cheese dispenser. And then in the morning is the donut shop.
And
that's all you get.
It's really no different now. I mean, there are only certain places open 24 hours. And officers that work the night shift,
right?
They have to
listen. I am pulling to have a steak and shake here. We need something that's accessible and it's open 24 hours. Like, it's not nasty. It's not like a great wholesome meal, but it's like, it'll do, and they got pancakes. All you can eat pancakes for, it used to be $4. I don't know what it is now, but they have a lot of pancakes for $4. And it's like, man, a steak and shake would work here. I think it would do just fine. And so I actually made a spoof, like a fake Facebook page years ago that was Place a Steak and Shake in Zephyrhills now. And it has like 100 followers on it. And every now and then I would like post something new just for fun.
Right.
But I keep thinking like, someday somebody's going to do it, and I'll just be able to claim that it was all because of my efforts that we have a steak and shake now in Zephyrhills. But so far it hasn't happened. We got the Chipotle and the Chick-fil-A and all this stuff.
At some point, the Chick-fil-A was somebody's idea.
It was somebody's idea. Bubba Coo's Burritos is open now, finally. It's right next to the liquor store and laundromat, or if you're not familiar with them, it's next to Harbor Freight Tools. Yeah. But some people are going to be more familiar with one than the other. Right. So I used to work at a car dealership in Nashville that was, we would tell people where it was, and they're like, I don't recognize that. And we'd say, it's across from the Purple Onion, which was like an adult novelty store. And they're like, oh, yeah, I know where that is. I'm like, oh, you know where that is? Okay. Like, we told you 3 other legit businesses, but okay. Speaking of which, we have an adult novelty store in Zephyrhills now, apparently, where the old lawnmower shop used to be.
Are you trying to get me to respond?
Nope, not
okay,
at all.
Right,
got your response. Perfect.
That, yeah.
It looks great, too. They did absolutely zero work updating the outside of the building. It still looks like it was a lawnmower engine repair shop. I don't know what the inside looks like, and I probably won't. But anyway.
Nick, I don't know anything about your personal life, so
Yeah, it's just not anywhere that I plan on being, so it's fine. No judgment, little judgment to people who do want to go there.
Right.
But that's their business. I try to live my life where I let people do their thing, and if they come to me and say, "Hey, I'm messing up. What do I need to do?"
Right.
I'll walk with you from there on out.
Sure, of course.
So. Anyway, well, Chief, thanks for being here. It's been fun, and I look forward to doing it again. Thanks for everything that you do in the community. Thanks for all your officers. We've had a lot of great interactions with them.
Yeah.
Me, like anyone else, we've needed police services before. I've had stuff of mine stolen, and the officers responded to that.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, somebody that routinely sells pills on the street was the one that helped me find my stolen property because he knew the guy that had stolen it. And I don't know what kind of favor he was looking for at the time or what goodwill he thought it would buy him. But anyway, I was grateful that he did help out. And so anyway, he, I got my, it was my grandfather had like it's a 1968 Honda Trail 90 little motorcycle that they go up like the side of a mountain like a billy goat almost.
Oh, wow.
Real cool.
Yeah.
It was my grandfather's, and I received it from his stuff when he passed away. And I used to like cruise around on it just around the block and stuff, and I had it cabled up inside the fence at my house here, and inside the chain link, and I learned really easily that quarter-inch braided steel cables cut really easily with bolt cutters apparently. So they took it right out of my yard in the middle of the morning, like at 11 a.m. when I was going to the grocery store, and so that hurt. But like a month later, I had it back, and had the officers there like trying to get fingerprints off of it and stuff.
But at the same time, that was a horrible feeling, though.
Oh, it was a terrible feeling. Like that was,
right.
I mean, the things are worth like in good shape $1,500, which is amazing for a bike that's that old. But it really didn't matter if it was worth $100 or 10,000. It was, that was something I remember my grandfather taking me on a ride on around their yard.
Right.
And so it was like, that was just, it was just thing. And a story for another time, just more on like on a personal spiritual level is some of the things that God taught me about that, and about how much I was clinging to things that I said, well, this is mine. And it was mine. Like it was nobody else's but mine. And that guy had no right to it. But the point was something that through that God spoke to me about.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you holding on to some things too tight that are getting in the way of some of the other stuff that I'm supposed to do? And so I actually had to go through a time after that where I said, okay, God, if you need to take my stuff and redistribute it to someone else, then that's how it is. And so I started entrusting everything to him, which really changed things. I had something else get stolen, and it was my fault. It was stupid. I had a golf cart. I left it right outside my house, like next to the driveway with the key in it. I'd forgotten it was out there. Like I was driving it around, because we've got stuff here on the church property. Like the garage is on the other end of the property, and it's so far away that I got tools there. And if I'm doing something, I'm like walking back and forth. I'm never getting anything done because of my tools are all down there. So I got this golf cart. I ride back and forth to grab tools and stuff. And I forgot that I'd left it right out there with the key in it and on. And somebody snagged it in the middle of the night and Joy rode it all the way up towards Daughtery Road and crashed it into a stump, and apparently fell through the windshield or something because they broke the windshield.
Really?
So that was the only like good side of it. But then it got towed across county to like Hudson because that's who was next on the list for retrieval. And I mean, I didn't even know until I came out and said, wait a minute, where's my cart? And one of your officers had already, like, when I called, he's like, yeah, I know where your cart's at, but you're not going to be happy. It's in the towing lot. And so that was like $200 and something, $256 to retrieve it. Yeah. But anyway, it's just like, oh man, okay. And so that part I hated, but at the same time, I was like, okay, if my cart needed to get stolen, it needed to get stolen. And that's something that I think it takes a lot of commitment, as like I'm a Christian, so as a Christian it takes a lot of commitment to trusting God for something like that. And that I was like, all right, God, if you're testing me, it's a strong it's solid, but you know what, in the end it's an old golf cart that I paid $500 for, which I got a steal on it. It was a good deal, but I mean, like, okay,
but it's hard to keep that in perspective when you're going through it. So.
It is hard, and it was like at that moment I'm like, okay, I don't know if I'm being prepared for something bigger here, and this is like not like I'm like Job in the Bible, who lost everything except for his nagging wife. Which I mean, read the story. That's what happened. He lost everything except for his nagging wife. So she was terrible. Not all wives are, but this one was. And some of you can relate, I'm sure. But I was like, am I about to lose more stuff? And is my heart and perspective on it right now and how I respond to this, is that preparing me for something bigger that's happening? And so that's a different topic for maybe even a different audience, but I'm talking about, surrendering your life to something bigger than you. And God trains us on those things and the smaller things. And so that was part of my journey, but that was a time that I needed, the police services, and they were helpful, and it was good to have them there.
Well, I'm glad we were there. And please, I think the good thing about having working in a community like this is, I'm never that far away. And if you thought something wasn't right about a police interaction, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want community members to feel like, we did something out of sheer, just because we wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and sometimes that does happen, and
you have internal procedures for how to deal with that, which might be, it might be something that you've seen as a characteristic that's ongoing, but it might just been, like you say, an officer had just the culmination of a bad day or a bad week
Absolutely.
or whatever. So
Yeah, and we can fix that stuff.
and I think that's where the empathy has to go both ways, from the citizenry to the officers. We've got to
Sure.
be like, you know what? All right. I mean, we've probably all been pulled over where we weren't happy with the interaction,
Sure.
somewhere. I mean,
Right.
I got singled out of a line of speeders because I had merged in with the fast lane of traffic. This is in Tennessee, in the fast lane of traffic to let others merge onto the interstate. And when I came over, I'm the only one in that row, but I was going the speed of these people. And I was trying, that was when I was actually
Right.
reforming my driving ways, trying to not speed. And I just remember feeling so like beat up at that point because I'm like,
Sure.
I'm trying, I'm trying
Right.
to be better and I can't. And so, sometimes you leave those interactions just not appreciative of it, but at the same time, a little empathy the other direction. Like,
Sure.
what did they go through? Where were they at today? They might have just delivered some news to someone that their
Or
their
we
loved
made a
one died.
mistake.
Or yeah, yeah, that too. So, yeah, absolutely. Anyway, all right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate
No,
it.
thank you. I really appreciate it. We'll do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So real quick, for the show, we've got an email address. You can send me anything that you'd like to talk about. That is talkwithnickaboutanything@gmail.com. We'll have a few links in the description for this podcast episode that you can talk about. As always, if you have anybody that you'd like to see as a guest, or you might like to be a guest on this show, I would love to hear from you. And so send me an email to that, and I can send you a link to my recording schedule. Love to talk with you about just about anything. And my belief is that people have experiences and stories and expertise even that is useful and beneficial to others. And so as we get to share those with each other, maybe we can all learn and grow and be more decent human beings and more loving towards our neighbors around us. So on behalf of Chief Brewer and the Zephyrhills, City of Zephyrhills Police Department, we appreciate you listening and taking part in this, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.